Tribal Chief shocker. Moxley responds. Roman Reigns reaction. Jacob Fatu speaks. Moxley vs. Tribal Chief? What happens when one of the most dangerous men in professional wrestling publicly acknowledges Roman Reigns as his tribal chief? And why did Jon Moxley's reaction leave so many fans talking long after the moment itself had passed? Those two questions have been hanging over the wrestling world ever since Jacob Fatu made a statement that immediately grabbed the attention of fans everywhere. At first glance, it may have seemed like a simple acknowledgement. Just a few words. Nothing more. But if you've watched wrestling long enough, you know that sometimes the smallest moments create the biggest conversations. And this was definitely one of those moments. Because when Jacob Fatu speaks, people listen. Not because he's the loudest guy in the room. Not because he spends every second chasing attention. But because Jacob Fatu has built a reputation as someone who feels authentic. Someone who carries himself with an intensity that can't be manufactured. Every time he appears, it feels like something important could happen. He has that rare quality where fans immediately stop scrolling through their phones and start paying attention. Now add Roman Reigns to the equation. Suddenly things become much bigger. Roman Reigns isn't just another wrestler. Whether people love him or hate him, whether they support him or criticize him, he's become one of the defining figures of modern wrestling. For years, he sat at the top of the mountain. He transformed himself from a polarizing star into the centerpiece of one of the most successful storylines in wrestling history. He became the face of dominance. The face of leadership. The face of the bloodline. So when Jacob Fatu openly recognizes Roman Reigns as tribal chief, fans naturally begin asking questions. What does it mean? Why now? What happens next? And perhaps most interesting of all, what do other major stars think about it? That's where Jon Moxley enters the picture. Now let's be honest for a second. Jon Moxley and Roman Reigns have always shared an unusual connection. Long before they became major stars in separate promotions, they stood side by side as members of one of the most influential factions wrestling has ever seen. They fought together. They traveled together. They built careers together. Then their paths separated. Roman became the king of an empire. Moxley became wrestling's ultimate rebel. Roman embraced leadership. Moxley embraced chaos. Roman became the tribal chief. Moxley became the guy who seems perfectly comfortable fighting in places most human beings wouldn't even want to visit. Seriously, there are moments when Moxley looks like he'd rather wrestle inside a thunderstorm than inside a normal arena. That's just who he is. And fans love him for it. That's why people became fascinated when discussions about Jacob Fatu's acknowledgement eventually led back to Moxley. Fans wanted to know how a man like Jon Moxley viewed a moment like this. Would he dismiss it? Would he respect it? Would he see it as a sign of Roman's influence? Or would he see it as something entirely different? The fascinating thing about Moxley is that he has never seemed overly impressed by status. Championships matter. Accomplishments matter. Legacy matters. But Moxley has always carried himself like someone who values toughness and authenticity above everything else. That's one of the reasons his fan base is so loyal. People believe him. When Moxley speaks, fans often feel like they're hearing the real person rather than a carefully crafted character. So when discussions about Jacob Fatu and Roman Reigns started spreading, people naturally became curious about Moxley's perspective. And honestly, who can blame them? Because the entire situation feels layered. On the surface, it's about respect. But underneath that, it's about influence. It's about power. It's about leadership. It's about who truly commands attention in professional wrestling today. Roman Reigns spent years building an empire around those ideas. The Bloodline story wasn't successful because of championships alone. It succeeded because it convinced fans that Roman Reigns was more than a champion. He was a leader. A ruler. A figure whose presence affected everyone around him. Every acknowledgment strengthened that image. Every alliance reinforced it. Every rival who stepped into his orbit added another chapter to the story. Jacob Fatu's acknowledgment instantly reminded people of that. It reminded fans that Roman's influence continues extending beyond individual matches. That's not an easy thing to achieve. Many wrestlers become champions. Very few become symbols. Roman somehow became both. And that's where things become complicated for fans trying to analyze the situation. Because acknowledging Roman Reigns doesn't necessarily mean surrendering to him. It doesn't necessarily mean agreeing with every decision he's ever made. It doesn't automatically make someone a follower. Sometimes acknowledgement is simply recognition. Recognition of accomplishments. Recognition of influence. Recognition of a legacy that cannot be ignored. And if there's one thing wrestling fans understand, it's legacy. Fans spend years debating legacy. Who's better? Who's greater? Who changed the business? Who left the biggest impact? Those conversations never end. Honestly, wrestling fans could probably debate legacy during a power outage with no internet and still somehow keep the argument going for 6 hours. That's part of what makes this community so entertaining. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a favorite. Everyone believes their argument is the correct one. Now imagine how much bigger those debates become when you involve names like Roman Reigns, Jacob Fatu, and Jon Moxley. That's not a conversation. That's an explosion waiting to happen. And that's exactly what happened. The moment Jacob Fatu acknowledged Roman Reigns, social media erupted. Fans started analyzing every possible meaning behind it. Some saw loyalty. Others saw respect. Some believed it was a statement about family. Others believed it was a statement about power. A few fans somehow turned it into a prediction for future storylines. Of course they did. Wrestling fans can find clues in absolutely anything. A raised eyebrow becomes a conspiracy. A handshake becomes a secret alliance. A 5-second stare becomes evidence of a future main event. It's honestly impressive. But in this case, the speculation wasn't entirely unreasonable. Because Jacob Fatu is not just another wrestler making casual comments. He's viewed as one of the most intimidating and explosive performers in the business. Everything he does carries weight. Everything he says attracts attention. And because of that, his acknowledgement immediately felt important. As discussions continued growing, Moxley's name kept appearing in conversations. Not because he directly inserted himself into the story, but because fans couldn't stop comparing the philosophies represented by these three men. Roman Reigns represents control. Jacob Fatu represents destruction. Jon Moxley represents unpredictability. Put those three ideas together and you have a fascinating dynamic. One builds kingdoms. One destroys obstacles. One thrives in chaos. And somehow all three command enormous respect from wrestling audiences. That's rare. Very rare. Most stars struggle to connect with fans for a few months. These men have built identities that remain compelling year after year. That's why people continue talking about them. That's why moments like this matter. Now let's talk about Roman Reigns for a second because his role in all of this cannot be overlooked. Roman's journey has been extraordinary. There was a time when fans questioned whether he could ever become the face of the industry. Every decision was scrutinized.